Welcome to the West Virginia Case Podcast, hosted by Les Odell. Join us as we dive deep into all things strange, including Bigfoot, aliens, ghosts, and more. Pull up a chair and set for a spell. It's going to be a great time. Now, without further delay, let's get the show started.
Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention, please? The show starts in 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Hi, folks. Welcome back to the West Virginia Case Podcast. Today, we're going to have Robert Solomon on. He's the host of This Uncanny Earth podcast. He's an Ohio native, and we're going to talk about giants. But before we get started with that, I just wanted to throw out a couple of things here. One of the things I want to talk or say is we want to send our condolences to a friend of the show, Mr. Fred Saluga. He lost his daughter today, and we really want to send out our condolences. We also want to talk about or just announce that Penn Ohio Paranormal Conference 2 is going on today. It is at Hickory VFW, post 6166. It's at 5550 East State Street, Hermitage, PA 16148. If you want to come and listen to Robert speak about giants and ancient cultures, come on out there Saturday. He will be speaking there. So without further ado, let's bring on Robert. Hey, sir. How you doing?
Good afternoon. Actually, it's good evening here in Ohio. Thank you very much for having me on. And yeah, definitely prayers and my heart goes out to Fred Saluga. I had just seen that when I logged into Facebook to check Messenger and stuff. So definitely my heart goes out to him and his family at this time.
Yeah, we all know Fred, and he's a great guy, and I hate to hear that. I mean, it's a very, very sad thing to lose a child, and yeah, definitely hard thing to take.
And a lot of people don't know this, but Fred and Bob Schultz were who gave me my first speaking gigs. So without either of those two gentlemen, I probably would not be here right now. So I'm definitely appreciative of that.
And for those of you that don't know Fred Saluga, he is a how do you want to say this? A very seasoned investigator when it comes to all things strange, Bigfoot, aliens, you name it, he's in it. He's the state director of MUFON in West Virginia, and I think he's the assistant state director in Pennsylvania. He's been doing it a long time, 50 plus years. And so our hearts go out to him as well. So, Robert, just tell us a little bit about you. Just tell, give a background on yourself.
I am what I like to say is I'm a well-versed human being. I read all kinds of books. I'm big into history. I read quite a plethora of history books, as you can see behind me. That's just one bookshelf. I have many others strewn throughout my house. And then I have books that are sitting on the carpet there because I cannot seem to find enough bookshelves in the world to put them in. But I enjoy research. I enjoy meeting new people. I started getting into the forays of paranormal and the esoteric stuff about 10, 15 years ago now. It all started with Ancient Aliens, and I just started getting into a lot of stuff in that realm, and then it started branching off. And I've always been into religious text. I grew up in church. I grew up reading the Bible, and I was always fascinated with giants, the Nephilim. And I thought to myself, how does this relate to everything else in the world? And so I just started doing, some more research, and I started reading more, and I started meeting other people. And I recently started visiting mounds to get the Native American aspect on giants, and just the Native American culture as a whole, I think is highly important to the things we do here in the United States. As for what I like to do outside of that, I play a wide range of video games, and I go to work, and that's about all I do. I don't really do much else.
I seen on your profile that you're a voice actor.
Yes, sir.
Do that?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir. I've been voice acting for roughly about 4 years now. So I've always done impersonations, and a good buddy of mine, Kenny Vigu, shouts out to him. he had set up this podcast based around the Fallout universe, 76 to be precise. And so I sent him a reel, and I didn't end up doing anything else with it. I didn't really get back into contact. I was going through some things at the time, so my mind was everywhere. And he reached out to me and he said, "Hey, do you want to do this podcast with us? This show that takes place in the 76 universe?" And I said, "You know what? Let's go ahead and do it. I've always wanted to do it. I've always wanted to voice act." So I decided to jump in both feet, and it ended up leading us to Boston, where we got to meet with Bethesda, the bigwigs at Bethesda, the guys who made 76. And we got to voice act and put on one of the podcasts in front of them. And actually, Pete Hines, who's no longer with Bethesda at present, he was he was on the podcast. And it's on YouTube. You can find it. I'm in there. Much longer hair at the time, because I had longer hair at the time, but it was very wonderful. Boston was a cool city. I had never been. And the history person inside me was like, "You are in one of the oldest cities of America right now," and to me, I got to see the old graves. We got to go out because we were there Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and I left Sunday. So Thursday and Friday, we just kind of went sightseeing, and I got to see some really old graves from the late 1700s, 1800s. So it was pretty interesting. I enjoyed it. Saw a lot of old churches. It's just a different feeling, when you live in the Midwest. It's different because the New England states are very interesting to me. I definitely would like to go back at some point. But yeah, I've been voice acting. I've been on a couple other podcasts, and I love it. I love voice acting. I've been doing it for a long time, doing impersonations. So it's like, why wouldn't that be the next level?
Yeah, pretty cool. I've never even got in any. I wouldn't even know how to get into that. So, you're just talking about the Northeast area. You like the Northeast. Is there any? We'll just jump right in. Is there anything in that area as far as giants related that you've studied on?
Now, at present, there was a bit here. Let me see, because I have so many presentations that I have done at this point. But there is some, and I believe, give me 1 second here, because I was wondering that myself, because a lot of the mounds and a lot of the things that we see, and here's something for you, because you told me you'll be in Vermilion here. On the shores of Lake Erie, there's a number of mounds that have been found, and there's a lot of giant activity out there. But up by what they would call trying to think of the name for it, it's the Bridgewater Triangle.
Right.
So it's it's in that area. There are some mounds there where they have found some giant bones, but once again, and as I've said before, the Smithsonian comes in and nabs the skeletons.
Do you think this? Okay, we'll jump into that already. Okay, that was one. Do you think the Smithsonian? I mean, the Smithsonian was started in 1846.
Yep,
James
Smithson.
Right. It was 1882 when they established the actual division of mound studies.
Yes.
So I can understand that there are stories or accounts where they were contacted. Yep. But what do you think where do you think a lot of skeletons went prior to the Smithsonian?
I think so there is a time period in American history that I like to consider the archaeological Wild West, where you could get like me and we could pull Bill and Fred and just go out somewhere, dig up on a patch of land, pull up whatever we found, and we didn't have to register it. We didn't have to tell anybody we found it. We could basically kill each other and take it, and nobody would be the wiser.
Yeah.
What I think they did a lot of the times, finding these bones, some people I think were perplexed and destroyed them. You got a lot of very serious religious folks during that time period that probably said, "You know what? I don't think this is of God, so I'm going to destroy it." And there's been a couple of occasions where farmers have just dug the bones up and destroyed them. I think also people kept them. They find these giant bones and they keep them, and they just do whatever. I think as we move forward in time, I think people digging up, you got something that's so old, you don't even know it. You're breaking it. You're digging a shovel into your property. Right. You're destroying it. But I think a lot of times with them digging into the mounds, however, a lot of that stuff, I don't think they cared so much about bones.
Right.
I think they wanted the jewels because there's a lot of cases where they dug into mounds and they would find an armor encrusted skeleton and the armor's gone. The
Right.
jewels are gone. They leave the bones because they don't really care about the bones. But then when I think you have things like the Smithsonian and higher archaeological institutes starting to take precedence in American history, you start seeing dollar signs. You're like, oh, this is valuable to them. And I know that now. They just found it on my neighbor Bob's property. But now I found some on my property. I'm going to sell them. And then what I think happens is because there are cases of once the Smithsonian's founded, they send researchers across the United States, some to people that have already found bones. There was a high school, I believe, out in California that had a giant skeleton on display. They had found it nearby. They had posted it up, and the Smithsonian came in, bought it, and it was gone.
Was that found anywhere near the Catalina Island in California?
I'm not sure of that. I think that was more, I want to say more northern. I'm not familiar with where the Catalina Islands are specifically in California, because, like I said, a lot of the research that I have found regarding giant skeletons are in the Pennsylvania, Ohio, West Virginia, Georgia. A lot of them are more there, and I get a lot less finds in the West Coast. Like I got some in where the Pueblos lived and places like that where the cliff dwellers live too. And they'll find stuff, but it's a lot harder because you have cave systems and such. And I think a lot of times a lot of that stuff was taken into those cave systems and left.
Yeah, I will jump back into here. You were talking about West Virginia. A lot of my research here in West Virginia shows that pre-Smithsonian, a lot of the skeletons were found because what farmers did, I guess, or farmers or landowners or whatever. The mounds that were found most of the time were destroyed. They were destroyed for gardens or plowed under for reasons like that. A lot of the stuff that was found as far as bones were just disposed of. They were either shoved somewhere, buried, or they were just in such bad shape that they deteriorated when they were found. As far as some of the artifacts found, now there are stories where they were sold into an antiquities market, I guess you'd say. There's even one story here in my area where there was a mound that actually a train had derailed, in the late 1800s, I believe it was, and it disturbed this part of the nearby land. It was part of a mound apparently, and that there was these treasure seekers, or whatever you want to call them, come in and was taking out artifacts in coffee bean bags full, and they were taking them and selling them apparently. But I mean, there's stories all over the United States as far as giants being found, and some of those we've learned now are basically misidentification. For lack of better words, the people that were finding them were ignorant to the fact of what they were. You hear the stories about cyclops and stuff. When I were finding out that those were just woolly mammoth skulls and stuff like that. So with that being said, and you've dug into the biblical side of it. You was telling me earlier. Can you go into a little bit more about that?
So we have Genesis 6:4, chapter 6, verses 4, which begins the flood narrative. It begins the Nephilim who come down from heaven to mate with the female species. This is more discussed in the books of Enoch. You also have it discussed in, I believe, Third Barak, which is part of the Apocrypha. The Apocrypha is a series of books that were not listed in the Bible because the Council of Nicaea condensed those books. So this happens, and the product of female and Nephilim create what are known as, or the female and Watcher create the Nephilim, or these giant-like beings. Now, stories vary on how tall they were. I've heard some tales that put them around 15, 20 feet. I've heard tales that put them somewhere up in the range of 30 to 40 feet. And what they would do is they would consume. Now, if we take the idea of a giant and we compare it to ourselves, we consume because we burn energy, and that's how we have to eat. We consume because we're burning energy. So we're out there, you're out there working out, you're doing whatever, you're working, you're hungry, you build up an appetite. Well, these giants are a lot bigger. So their organs, their blood, everything else pumps different. So they're consuming more, and they end up consuming so much that they start eating mankind, they start eating each other. Well, at this point, the giants are just ravenous. And so mankind cries out to God and says, God, we need help, help us. And he hears those cries. He hears the cries from the bloodshed that these giants are committing. And so he says, okay, I'm going to flood the place and get rid of them. Now, something interesting that I've come across in the past week is that there is a roughly 1,000-year span or so, like maybe a little less, 900 to 1,000-year span between the time of Enoch. So the book of Enoch, he tells the giants, he said, because they're having dreams of what's going to happen. They're having these symbolic dreams of the flood coming to get rid of them. And they don't know what it means. So they go find Enoch to recite back to them what God is telling them. Well, Enoch does this. Well, Enoch is taken up when he is 365 years of age. Enoch is initially 65 when he has his son, and at 365, he's taken. Noah and that flood don't come around for roughly another 600 and some so years. So we have a span of about, I want to say, a good, 1,000 years. Because the hard part about all that is finding when Enoch actually talked to the giants, and you don't know because there's not a specific date that really relays that information to us. And so there's this span of time where they existed here. Now, it's interesting because Islam doesn't mirror that. A lot of times in Islamic folklore, it mirrors Judaism, because this isn't really Christianity as much as it's more Judaic folklore than it is anything else. And so after this happens, the flood comes and wipes them out. However, that's not the end of giants, because if we go into further into the Bible, we have Joshua, we have Chronicles, we have Kings, we have Deuteronomy even. It talks of the Rephaim, it talks about the Anak, the Anakim are a race of giants that existed. The Rephaim are a race of giants that existed. Goliath himself was a giant from the Philistines. The Philistines were also giants. So you still had giants on the earth at that time, just not these monstrous, ogreish-esque beings that were there at the time. And so now you're having wars with giants. And a lot of people point to gigantism. But if we look at the world's tallest man, and I'm drawing a blank on his last name. It was Robert. It's thank you. But if you notice, he wasn't limber. He wasn't able to move at the speeds that a lot of these other giants were. He was, I don't want to say a defect, but he was an anomaly. He was on the outlying spectrum. Now, you do have folks like Shaquille O'Neal and a lot of basketball players that are quite tall, that are highly athletic. But they're few and far between. There's not a whole race of these beings. And the Anakim were a whole race of beings. The Anakim were named after Anak, which was the son of Aber, who was like the patriarch of the giant lineage. And so you have these giants, these whole race of giants. And it's scattered throughout the Bible in the Old Testament. Not so much in the New Testament, because the New Testament's more of like teaching you a lesson and how to conduct your life through God. But the Old Testament is a survival manual. If you read the Old Testament like it's a survival manual, and the survival manual of a people and the wars they went through and the other societies that they had to face, there is giants that are just sprinkled throughout. And that's the thing. It talks about it. Joshua says that they looked like trees, and we were grasshoppers in their eyes. Grasshoppers in their eyes. And so to me, when I connect that with other aspects like the Arabic verse in the Quran that talks about the city of giants known as Iram, that they were tall, they were lofty, high men. And when you see a giant, you're not just going to say, oh, he's a little bit bigger than me. That'd be like me saying to my buddy who's 6 feet, I know he's tall, but he's not a giant. Now, if I see a man that's 9 foot, 10 foot tall, then that's something that's going to spark something in my brain to say, okay, something is different here. Let me write about this. Because, you don't have anybody in history that's writing about the magnificence of somebody that's 5'7". Nobody's like, he was 5'7", but somebody that's 8 feet tall, 9 feet tall, 10 feet, up to 13 feet tall, as we found in some of these mounds, starts questions. It starts questions. And I think when we trace the Bible, we trace the Quran, we trace the other religious texts that talk about giants. And I always look in religious texts to find giants that are humans, human-esque giants, because you have stories from Greek mythology that'll talk about Zeus, Atlas, Kronos. These are already legendary beings, so of course they're going to be gigantic creatures. They're gods. They're gods and titans, so they're going to be large. But I look for the humans. I look for the human beings in these tales and myths that are shaped like us, and that's where I start drawing some similarities to other cultures.
Okay, you're talking about the human look and looking like humans. I believe in some texts they talk about the Nephilim looking more reptilian. They'd have like snake heads, and they were giants, but they weren't like humanoid. I mean, I guess they were humanoid shape, but they were talked about being hairy, but would have like serpent heads and stuff like that. So I'm trying to think how to ask this. Where does that separate? Where does the Nephilim and the giants of old, such as like maybe the mountain giants of Siberia, or which are supposedly anywhere from 20 to 30 feet tall, where do they? How are those separated? I mean, is there a way that they're separated in your mind, or is there any information out there that shows a separation? How they're different.
Well, what I like to point to a lot of times, and this goes back to the Old Testament, when it's 1:6, I believe, of Genesis, that talks about God creating mankind and womankind, and he tells them, go forth and multiply. But he later goes on to 2 people, meaning Adam and Eve. But I think that is symbols for man and woman. I highly believe there were civilizations that were created. And so there's different races of people that existed on the planet at that time. So a lot of times what I think, because I've heard of the Siberian ants, and you're going to have to send me something about, because I've never heard the Nephilim having snake heads and things like that. So when you get a chance, if you find it, send it to me, because I'm always ready to learn about something new. What I think happens is there are things in this world that we just it can't be comprehended. And so you have these mountain giants. I believe that at one point there were mountain giants in West Virginia. Heck, there could still be mountain giants in West Virginia. The Appalachian Mountains are very old, and the cave systems and everything else. What I think separates a lot of these is just people migrate out. People are in one location and they start migrating out to different places and different avenues, different locations. And I think that once you get there, you surround yourself with people like you, and there might be already people there. I don't think, in my personal opinion, I don't think that life started in one region of the planet Earth. I think it's been all around the planet of the Earth. I think the continents have shifted. I think the landscapes have been the same or have been shifted, because Antarctica is a prime example of this. Yeah. At one point, Antarctica was a lush jungle region. They have old maps that show parts of Antarctica looking different from the Antarctica that we see. And why is every country in existence, superpower-wise, in that country? I mean, we claim not to like each other. We claim to dislike each other in other countries, but we're in Antarctica and nobody's allowed to fire a shot. Nobody's allowed to do anything that will cause an issue. Why is that? Why are people so in love with that frozen piece of rock, even though 3 miles down or a little bit further down than that, there's landscape like we would have here in the United States?
Right. Well, we go into conspiracy theory, I guess, on that when talking about the center, the hollow Earth theory when it comes to Antarctica. we can either talk about that a little bit, or if you want, if you know anything about it, or
I
just
do.
brush past.
I do.
Okay, yeah, we'll talk
I
about it.
do.
That's yeah,
So one of the big things of Nazi Germany and
right,
Hitler was the New Schwabenland down in Antarctica. And supposedly, finger quotes here, because I don't want people to be like, oh, they had a place that went into the earth. And
hmm
I don't think, I don't necessarily believe hollow earth theory to the full extent. A lot of people
right,
believe it,
right,
but I do believe there's something to it, because human beings, we need vitamin D. We need it. We need the sun's rays,
right,
because it's nurturing to us. So, and I don't know humans evolutionary traits that would evolve quickly enough to where they could live without sunlight. Um, but I do think that it's possible if you have access to the outside parts of the world. And there have been some cave systems that open up, and there is a large sort of, I would call it a sunroof, that just the sun comes down. So I'm not saying it's not possible. I think personally that yes, Hitler, the Nazis were working on that, because why Antarctica of all places? Once
yeah,
again, Antarctica is a very interesting place in the world. So I do think that there could be some form of giants there. Um, people have a weird, giants don't have to operate on the same physiological level that us humans, who are shorter, who don't have similar our organs don't pump blood the same speeds and everything else.
right,
So I think that they operate different. So I think it is possible, and I always say that because it's possible, but I don't have physical proof.
right,
So I have to play the hypothesis game in my head. um, but if there is something there, personally, I think whatever it is has been dead for a long time, and we're researching it and trying to figure out what was there before, what was going on there. Um, are there entrances into parts of the planet that we can use as basically like a shortcut system?
mhm,
Maybe, but I don't know if it's. I don't think it's going to be like the movie Total Recall, where they just take it right through the center of the earth. But I do think there's openings. There's the cave systems connect in some form or fashion, because we haven't mapped out all the caves on the planet. We haven't even mapped out the ocean. We
right,
don't know even what's in a good chunk of our oceans. So it's like, okay, I've heard reports of UFOs going into to where they have seen the Loch Ness monster,
right,
and it'll go into the loch and go into there and things like that. And
yeah,
that's a story for another time. But there's got to be something. There's got to be something in Antarctica. I've always said there was, and I believe there is. Nobody, listen, if you grew up in Ohio, you grew up in West Virginia, you grew up in Pennsylvania, nobody is trying to dig through the ice on the lake to find something.
mhm,
No, I mean, some people might. I know I would not be. I don't want to do that. But there's a reason why we're doing that on a whole ice sheet. There's a reason. There's a
yeah.
reason.
Well,
Plain and simple.
what's your take on the? I guess again, the conspiracy theory that part of Antarctica is, even for satellites, is blocked out. You can't actually view certain areas of it if like on Google Earth or something like that.
And how many other there's a couple other places on the planet where you can't view it on Google Earth either.
Right.
It's a weird, like um almost like those channels you shouldn't be watching on cable TV,
Yeah.
that would be looking fuzzy. It looks like that.
Right.
Like I said, I tell people the government isn't your friend. And I can point to numerous conspiracies that turned out to be true. Operation Paperclip and Operation Northwoods are two that were factual. We did bring Nazis over after World War II. Werner von Braun, key player in the atomic race with Oppenheimer. So if you think the government's got your best interests at heart, I have some swampland in Florida. I mean, a bridge. I mean, I have things to sell you. Uh, so yes, I do think there's spots. I think that the government does that. And some people might say they do that to protect the people. And maybe there's a small percentage they do. They don't want people to go ballistic. You start finding out that giants are real. What's next? You start finding out that there is something in Antarctica, that there was a whole civilization like Atlantis, or you find out that Atlantis is real. What else are they lying to us about? And what else is going on? And we saw it with this whole UFO thing. I remember when they released those documents, and I read it. I was like, let me read it. It was redacted. Anything that I wanted to know was redacted. So, like I said, and like I'll always say, I 100% believe that there are things that they take pictures of on Google Earth that the governments of the world say, we do not want that shown. You better not show it. Don't do it. And they will not. And I think that's why they're blocked out. I do 100% believe that something is going on in Antarctica. And I don't think it's just willy-nilly, we're studying the climate. I think that's an easy way out.
Well, let's circle back around to government, I guess. I'm not a conspiracy, but as far as we'll just not in anything like that. But as far as Abraham Lincoln's speech in Niagara Falls, and he talks about, I don't remember the exact quote how it went, talks about giants coming from the land or coming from within the land. You think that was meant for actual giants? You think that even at that point in time that the government, or I mean, for lack of better words, the government had knowledge of there was actual giants, and he was hiding them or the information from people back then?
100%. It's just like the famous Ronald Reagan speech that everybody points to about extraterrestrial life. I think it's very much the same. The government has known what it's been doing for a long time. And once we came over and started basically taking the land bit by bit, piece by piece, we didn't just take the land. We took the text that came with the land. We took the folklore that came with the land. We took the idols, because there's a lot of information in idols that a lot of people think it's just an idol, but then you start comparing it to other idols that they found in other parts of the world, and there's very much similarities. And so we took all that, and to think that we would just dispose of this ancient knowledge that we didn't have is ridiculous. And I point to when the government raided Nikola Tesla's apartment, or whatever you want to call it. When they raided Nikola Tesla, they took documents.
Right.
They took whole documents with them. So it's very much in my personal beliefs that yes, the government knows about giants. They've known about them. You don't go to another country if you're an empire and not loot other things besides gold and besides jewels. You don't. When the Spanish conquistadors went into South American jungles, they have reports of seeing giants. You don't think they brought that back to Spain? You don't think Spain took that and said, okay, De Soto tried to bring back 2 Native American giants. And when I say Native American, I want to make sure we're understanding Americas are Canada all the way down through Mexico.
Right.
They brought, and in South America, obviously it's called the Americas. They brought back 2 giants. Well, the giants died en route, which makes sense because you're transitioning into a different climate. Threw them off. Right. But that's not the only. Peru, the indigenous population of Peru told another conquistador, there's giants up there.
Right.
And we don't go up there.
Right.
And it very much reminds me of the Native American laws regarding Bigfoot. We don't go over there.
Right.
Why don't you go over there? We don't go over there. We don't go over here. We don't go to these places. And so the government is going to 100% take stories, even if some of those stories are very fabricated. They're still going to take them because that's knowledge. Knowledge is a powerful weapon against an enemy. No matter who your enemy is, and knowledge is a very powerful thing. So they're going to take your books. They're going to take anybody who's going to know folklore, and they're going to want them to recite that, of course. Because what if there's something over there? And the government's like, well, there's something over there. And we want to know what that something is. And so, yes, they're going to keep those books, and yes, they're going to keep records of that. Now, what do they do with those records? I couldn't tell you. I think once they were able to get the bones of the giants, they were probably able to store them for a time, then once technology increased, they're
Yeah.
able to start running DNA tests and different tests on these bones to find out exactly what's going on with them. I think they still have a good chunk of them. I think they've destroyed quite a bit because you don't want that falling into the normal. Like our hands today are a lot different than our hands were in the 1800s. The amount of information I can send you, Les, in about a minute is phenomenal. I can send you a solid gigabyte or more in a minute, depending on how fast my internet is.
Right.
So it's like, I have Xbox games that I'll download in 2 minutes, and they're gigabyte size files. So I think they kept some because you would always want to keep something. You don't want to get rid of everything. You don't want to get rid of everything, but I think they kept some. And I think, yes, the government back then knew it. And I think they drop little hints in the things that they do. I think they drop little hints and little things. And I don't like that purpose is kind of unknown to me. That purpose is unknown. Is it so that people will go full crazy? And so, the easiest way to discredit somebody is make them look crazy. Or do the old bait and switch. Give them something else for them to consume while you do something underneath. People are going to think I'm crazy. I'm really not, I promise. But they'll make me look crazy. So you can go back to this interview, and then when I have my mental breakdown later on from all this stuff, you guys can be like, oh, he was right.
Well, you're talking about South America, and
Yes, sir.
Have you ever heard the stories? I forget which conquistador it was, but he went to was it DeSoto? Who am I trying to think of?
Was it Magellan?
Maybe went into the mine.
There's so many that you
Yeah.
lose track because they kind of run together a little bit. I get it.
But anyway, he started hearing stories of giants that the Mayans were talking about, and some people believe that the Mayans and other cultures that are in South America actually started in what is now, the United States, like the Southwest of the United States,
Mhm.
and a race of giants, they're, pushed them south. And what do you know about that? Have you heard anything like that before? I mean,
I don't
I
know.
know,
Go ahead. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
I know you probably know about the Lovelock Cave incident, where
Oh, yeah.
Native Americans there supposedly, well, I guess you can say more than supposedly, because there
Yep.
was actual remains found. There
Yep.
was artifacts found, in the 1921 or something like that.
Yeah, because I talked
1920s.
about that. I talked about that like two or three presentations back.
Yeah.
Because they basically bricked up the cave
Yeah.
and starved them. They starved them out. They were shooting arrows into it first, just taking them out one at a time, and then they
And
kind
then
of blocked them in, and
burn
then they
burn 'em
died,
out.
and then they took them
Burn
out.
'em
Yeah,
out. Yeah.
'Cause there's a couple different instances that I've read through where one was blocked up, another was burned out, but it's
Yeah.
like the Native Americans, they don't like these people. They consistently fight with them.
Yeah.
And so the idea that there could have been a whole race of giants isn't too far fetched
Yeah.
to me. And so as far as moving them down, yes. If your opponent is more powerful than you and you're not smarter than them, then you're not going to win. Because if your opponent's bigger and stronger, you have to be smarter. You have to be more intelligent than your opponent. You got a David and Goliath situation. You got to be more intelligent than your opponent. If not, no. And so you're going to get pushed. And then if you have internal strife within anytime you have a region that grows to a vast empire, there's going to be internal struggles. We have internal struggles here in the United States. It's granted, it's not as crazy as it is, say, in the Mayans and the Incans and Middle Eastern territories, but it's very much possible for a race of giants you got a whole race that are athletic. They know how to hunt. They know how to survive. They have a warlike mentality, because that's something I've noticed about some of the more giant accounts. I've read a few that the giants were very gentle and very helpful, but a lot of times they're very warlike. And so what I'm kind of wondering is these giants that are warlike, they're already here, and you already have your empire set up. Well, they know that you're doing something. They got lookouts, they got spies. They're just going to come down. And if I know, like if I'm of a primitive species and I know I'm bigger than badder than you, and I can get more land, and that's more resources for my people, I'm going to push out. because it's survival of the fittest at that point. You can't go down to your local Arby's or Burger King and get food. I got to get food from the animals. I got to get food from whatever crops we're growing. And if I got more land to do that in, and there's a water source, and there's a fresh water source nearby, you're done. I'm taking everything you have as long as I can take it. But I'm not well versed in that too well. So if you have anything to send me, like I said, I want to let everybody know I'm not an expert. I will 100% tell you all I'm not an expert. And anything that I get sent regarding giants, I will read and always evaluate my opinions and my thoughts based on what I've read. So I don't want people out there being like, oh, he's an expert. I want everyone here expert come out of anybody's mouth when they're, because I am not. I am not an expert.
Well, before we went on a little bit ago, before we come on, we were talking about the different, I guess, races maybe of giants. There was the red-headed giants, the black-headed,
Yes,
and if you look into some of the older texts here in the United States, I guess you'd say Native American lore or whatever, the red-headed giants were not friends. They were considered cannibals. They were considered, children and women stealers. The black-haired giants were considered brothers. But I don't know how to feel about that about it in a way, because if you look into some of the reports that are made about mounds being excavated, a lot, which here we'll put this question up, because we're going to delve into this a little bit. Do you think some of the mounds were native built? Yeah, I do. Definitely, for sure. But you look into some of the giant skeletons found in these mounds, they talk about them having red hair.
I just want to take a break for a second. Yeah. I didn't think anybody was commenting because it was on private chat and it's on comments. Let me run through this quick. Hey James, hi Leah, hey Bill, Johnny, BFFG, how's it going? Linda, hello Linda. Tammy, hello Tammy. Linda was very nice and promoted this earlier, and I appreciated that. Thank you, Linda. Of course, my co-host is here. He said, "Get them glasses on, boy. You're gonna ruin your corniness." I don't need no smart aleck remarks from you, young man. Hello, Danny. Hello, Amber. Okay, I think I got everybody. Sorry about that. I was just like, so what was the question that Bill posted? I'm so sorry.
Do you think the mounds that have been found, were they built by Native Americans, a race of Native Americans, I guess, that might have giants in them? Because you hear about a lot of the giants skeletons be found in mounds.
Yes.
And a lot of that you do hear about, it seems like it's centralized around one specific individual. Sometimes there's others, but it seems like there's like almost like a king, I guess you'd say.
Yes.
Or this one giant skeleton is found 7 to 8 feet tall, with others around that were much smaller, or the giant may have, or the skeleton may have 2, 3, 4 female skeletons that were beyond or above normal size as well, and then others that were just average size. Now I got off the point I was trying to get, but yeah, you hear about that, but what do you think, or do you think there was just a race of Native Americans that were huge, or just it happened to be there were individual like there are now? And
I'm sorry to interrupt you again. I don't mean to do that.
That's okay. I mean, you have people now that are big, but back then the average size for a human was smaller than what it is now. I forget what the average size is now. I mean, it used to be like 5 foot something. Now it's like 6 foot.
Yeah, it was like 5'7" or 5'6" was the average European.
Right.
So obviously you see somebody that's, 8 feet tall, you're gonna be like, oh my God, they're 8 feet tall.
Even 6.5, 7 foot tall, they're going to think, my goodness, it's
especially if you can move with athleticism. If you're walking with a cane and you're looking like you're walking like you have a handicap of some form, they're just gonna be like, okay, that's one of the ones that might just have a deformity, that might have like a growth deformity. You know what I mean? But you have a whole race that's just strutting around like it's nothing, running, hiking, able to, hunt, it's a whole different ball game. Anyways, I wanted to point to something. So if a lot of us, and myself and you and probably a lot of folks in the chat, I don't know if you guys know, but you probably do, about the Great Serpent Mound. I've been there.
Mhm.
I'm sure that Les has probably been there before. So there's actually a mound that is close by that area. And they think it was Dr. Warren Moorhead. This is in 1891. Dr. Warren Moorhead and Dr. Cresson believe they found the king and queen of mound builders
Mhm.
based on what they found inside. They exhumed this massive skeleton of a man who's encased in copper armor and jewels, and his wife, or the queen, is also the same. And they don't really find a lot of that in any of the other ones. So what they believe is they have found that. Now, in regards to your question, I do think that the Native Americans probably have quite a few mounds, because you'll see somebody that's done something and you're like, that works. Well,
Right.
let's do it. Let's do it for ourselves, and we'll try that, and it works. So I don't think that every single mound that was ever found had a giant skeleton
No.
in it. No,
No.
I do believe there, because they have found mounds with people of height that we would consider to be average height. 5'8", 6 foot tall. But some of the bigger mounds that they found, they have like 9 foot, 10 foot, up to 13 foot tall people buried there, and in a very ceremonial way. They're buried too. They're buried in like a circle, or they're buried sitting up. So yes, I do think the Native Americans probably built some of the mounds. Yes, 100%. Because you see what works. You see what works. Like today, we bury people in the ground. How long we been doing that? Like in flat ground, mind you. Like we flat. Well, as flat as it could be, mind you. And then we bury them underground and put a stone in front of their grave and say, "This is where so and so is buried." How long we've been doing that for? We've been doing that for a very long time. So it's and I think a lot of it too is honoring the dead.
Right.
We honor the dead here by putting a nice headstone on it. They honor their dead, and I think what they and what I'm seeing is what they did do is the people that were actually important, like your more important people into what you were doing, you got a bigger mound. So if you were just like a regular, but kind of maybe like something in their army or their soldiers or how they did it, you got a mound. You might have got like a nice sized mound, but if you were the head, if you were the king, your mound would damn near stretch to the heavens.
Right. And the skeletons weren't always found in mounds. The
No.
giant, many of them were found just, I guess you say, by happenstance, or
Yeah.
and a lot of them were along waterways, rivers, streams. There's actually one here in Marion County where I live. There was actually a couple, actually three. One was in Mon County, two were in Marion County. The one in Mon County was in 1882. It was Mr. and Mrs. Fetty. They were exploring an unusual rock formation along White Day Creek. I guess this is Marion. No, I thought White Day Creek is in Mon County. But anyway, when they found I brought this and bringing this one up because you said some were found setting up.
Yep.
They were found what appeared to be a shelter of stacked rocks. After removing several stones, they found a huge ancient mummy in the setting position. The giant was surrounded by stone and flint artifacts, which, right there, it seems to be a giant Native American. Just down the road from that is an area called Catawba. And that's an area that I've done some research on when I was looking into the giants of Marion County in Reedsville. There's a story talking about this, I guess you could say a construction crew, but this is back in the 1800s. We're digging for a footer for a bridge to cross the Paw Paw Creek when they came upon three skeletons that were supposedly of giant proportions, between 7 and 8 feet tall. And again, here we are with the red or black hair. These ones had red hair. Some of the text says that they were reburied. They were reburied in a certain cemetery. Well, that cemetery I've not been able to find yet. But again, when we talk about the Smithsonian and stuff like it, coming to getting some of these bones, these weren't. These were reburied because when they were found, they were quickly disintegrating, basically falling apart. So they
Yep.
were, a local doctor supposedly examined them. The reason I say supposedly and allegedly is because I've not found concrete evidence, that, I can't find, where the doctor actually examined it. It was just said that the doctor examined them. Even the doctor was a real person. I did find that, but I haven't found any documentation saying he actually examined these skeletons. Well, the town squire ordered them to be reburied, and they supposedly were supposed to be reburied in this cemetery. Well, that cemetery doesn't exist there, but when you start digging into it, you kind of find some other stuff. And I recently found that even though there's no cemetery where they were supposedly buried by it was called the Jolliffe Cemetery, where they were found. I found old maps of the area, and nearby, I mean, literally, feet, like 10, 15, 20 feet from where they were found was a Jolliffe homestead. So possibly that's where they ended up, might be, they were actually buried in a small cemetery there, and that cemetery is just long gone. But there's also stories about mounds in the area. The Macadam Road, what they call it, Macadam Road, or it's kind of a generic term, but they call it the Macadam Road. It's a road that was made from crushed mussel shells and stone from the Mon River this road ran from the confluence of the West Fork and the Tigert River, which is where they come together, forms the Mon River, which goes all the way to Pittsburgh, all the way to the Three Rivers in Pittsburgh. Well, this road supposedly ran from that confluence to an area called Little Creek. Well, Little Creek is right there. Is in the area of White Day Creek, pretty much, a mile or two apart. And there's actually been a mound recently. Well, I guess a lot of the people that live there have known about this mound. And I learned about it probably 5 years ago. But now when you actually Google the Catawba area, it actually shows on Google Maps the Catawba Mound. And that's just recent. That's the first time I've seen it in here a couple of weeks ago. But, it talks about all these mounds, or all the mounds and the waterway, or the roadway and everything coming to that one central area. And I thought that's pretty cool that there's a mound there as well. But like I said, it seems like a lot of them are in here in West Virginia and other areas in Ohio as well, and over into Pennsylvania, and some into Maryland, the Potomac River. A lot of these end up in the Wheeling area. A lot of the skeletons found are near water, and not necessarily in mounds. They were, there's one, I believe, in the Wheeling area. Or is it Moundsville? I'm trying to remember. Might be Wheeling, where they found a box, like, just a wooden box of some sort, where the water had washed the bank away. The bank eroded, and they found this box. And then inside it, they found somewhat remains, but what they did find is the impression of this skeleton in the clay, still in, inside this box. So yeah, not all of them are, in mounds. That's what a lot of people don't understand or don't realize.
I read an account of two Ohio farmers.
Mm-hmm.
They both were tilling the field. Right. And this wasn't a mound. This was a flat field. Anybody that lives in Ohio knows that the further up you go, the flatter it gets. They were tilling the fields, and they felt, what something's going on here. Dug it up, giant skeleton bones. Not anywhere near a mound, not anywhere near water at that time, but they found them in a field. So you have to wonder, because I think personally, a lot of times with your mounds, what I would think is that's for more important people, more important members of the tribe, as opposed to, say, somebody that's left in a field. And I don't think that at one time that was a mound either. I think that was just a flat field. Mm-hmm. It could have been a hunting party that were going around. Their guy got sick, or he got hurt, or he got injured, and they buried him. I mean, you're not going to carry a dead body so far enough to, you're going to bury it where you can. That's obviously going to be the way to go. And I think that's what happens with a lot of them too. You got your hunting parties that go out. They go out to find food, or they have a war. There's been a couple what they would call Indian battlefields, where they would have these giant skeletons they would find, but they would find them with Native American bones. I believe there's a mound that was close to Charleston. It's not there anymore. It was close to Charleston, West Virginia. And that was a somewhat battleground. And they did find some giant skeleton bones there, but they also found just some regular human being bones there as well. So it was like they found both, but they also found, arrowheads there. They found things like that. So there was a battle going on, but they just, you bury the dead where they lay, or they rot into the ground. We see, there's probably all kinds of bones in different battlefields that we have during the Civil War. They probably could go in and dig up and find all these bones, but you're going to leave them where they lay. Now, I wanted to say something here, because you were talking about was it the Jolliff? The
Jolliff, yeah.
Jolliff.
Yeah.
That sounds to me like a family cemetery.
Yeah.
So maybe they took them to the family cemetery as some form of respect and buried them at the family cemetery. I would definitely like to get with you, because I plan on this summer. I plan on going to a few mounds. I'd like to go to Moundsville. Haven't been there yet, because I would say I want to go to a place that definitely is called Moundsville. Like, I definitely want to go there, and it's not to see the prison. It's definitely to see the mounds.
You will. You go to Moundsville. You go to Grave Creek Mound. You're going to be standing you're literally right beside the prison.
Mm-hmm.
It's across the street.
It literally is across the street.
Literally across the street.
Is.
Yeah.
Yep.
But you're talking about. I lost my train of thought there. The mound in Charleston.
Mm-hmm.
There's one still in Charleston, the Creole Mound, I believe it is.
I took a picture there, and I actually had that as a profile pic for, and I actually posted it in one of my presentations. I love that mound, because you go down, and Charleston's a very complex city. It's a very different. You're on expressways for the most of it. You're making all these weird turns, and then when you go to it, because it's such a different dynamic to me than a lot of other archaeological sites that I've been to, because you're just going through, and boom, there's an antique store down the street. There's a place that sells boba tea down the street, and you're like, what? And it's it's a wonderful contrast to ancient civilization versus modern civilization. And people just go about their everyday life like it's nothing. It's nothing to them. That's so crazy to me. I've climbed it, because you can walk up the staircase that circles up to the top. Definitely one of my favorite sites to see when I'm in Charleston.
Well, the reason I was bringing that up is I got an actual, here we go, federal document from the National Register of Historic Places talking about the Creole Mound, and it talks about the Smithsonian coming in. Let me see if I can find that piece.
I need a copy of that. I need if you can make me a copy and send that to me, because I would love to see that.
Yeah, it says the original Creole Mound, located in a municipal park in downtown South Charleston, was 40 feet high, 525 feet in circumference, the base being almost a perfect circle. Sometime prior to 1883, when the Smithsonian Institute began excavation, the top of the mound was leveled to accommodate a small bandstand or a 40-foot diameter flat top. At the time colonial Moors began excavations, the mound had thus been reduced to 33 feet in height. A.R. Signs, one of the excavators in 1961, recalled that the mound was probably 8 to 10 feet higher than the present approximate 25 feet. He said that the original shape of the mound is thought to have been conical, while the present mound retains the flattened top. And then you go more into it, and you find this in it, where he was talking about A.R. Signs. It says A.R. Signs of Charleston, who assisted in the excavation in 1961, stated that one of the skeletons found there measures 6'8" and 3/4 inches from head to heel, but the extreme height indicated might have been exaggerated, created by earth pressing down on the burial. But if you look into it, the Smithsonian denies all skeletons that were found in any of them as giants. With 6'8" really isn't giant, I guess, but I guess for Native Americans or a Native culture, again, that's a pretty big person.
When because I read about that mound, because the mound that you go to today isn't the same mound that was there when it was completed, when they had buried them and built it up, because they took a good chunk out of it.
Right.
Like, I think they took, if I'm not mistaken, everything out of it and then repurposed it, like you said, to a smaller shape.
Right.
Because I had read the same thing. Now, if we look at the Smithsonian, if we jump back into this, Ars Herdlicka was part of like the whole concept of if you find something, and he goes on to say this. He says, if you ever find evidence of human life in a context which is ancient, bury it carefully, but do not forget about it. This is the same man that would go on to say that giants are no more, that they didn't exist. But he tells you if you find something that is ancient, go back, remember where it is. Like, that just means they're going to come back and collect it later. That's what I get out of that statement. If I'm wrong, please tell me.
And here's another one about the Creole Mound that I found. It was a newspaper. I just jotted these down. I don't have them in front of me.
I love it.
1883, Creole Mound, South Charleston. 13 skeletons unearthed, 10 which were arranged in a spoke-like pattern around one skeleton that was 6'8" to 7'6". And led in the excavation. No, that was that was a different one. No, that's right. Smithsonian performed excavation led by Lewis Morris. That is some stuff I wrote from an article I found online, a newspaper article.
Mm-hmm. So, and that's the thing. Like, I found Finleyville in Pennsylvania newspaper articles. I found let me see here. This book right here that I want to mention to folks if they're looking to read a little bit about it. Giants on Record. There's quite a bit of newspaper clippings. Not actual, the newspaper clippings aren't here, but the pictures of newspaper clippings are scattered throughout. Like, you'll have the this right here. You'll have something like this that will tell you, like, the Baptist Church Chronicle that talks about it. And there's so many of these. Like I told Les before the show, I could see if one culture, two cultures had a giant or a flood myth, and that's it. I'd be like, okay, we could take that for a grain of salt. Maybe they, who knows? But when you have multiple cultures, you have multiple researchers, you have the Smithsonian doing a whole cover-up. I could see one or two articles, but you have a plethora of giant skeleton articles that just crop up everywhere. And this is at a time in the United States where, science was very rigid. It was very much, this is it. This is how it is. It was that point in time. And yeah, Marilyn, I that's really interesting that your husband grew up playing on those mountains. It's so different to see that, because today, there's no mounds by me. We don't have mounds in this area. And if there was, they're not here anymore. There was one in Akron, which is the closest city to me. And that was excavated and removed well before I was born. So you have all of these things. I don't understand why more people don't believe in the existence of giants when you have the evidence pretty much right in front of your face. You could write off folklore if you want. That's fine. I believe there's always a kernel of truth in every folklore. There's always something there that is actual. When you have folklore, then you mix in newspaper articles, you mix in, the Smithsonian coming in and removing these bones. And there's been people that have said, yeah, the Smithsonian came in. They showed up with out where the Pueblo were, they showed up and they took some bones and they left. Took some bones and left. Took giant skeleton bones and left.
I've been meaning to ask you.
Yes.
I had to look it up real quick to make sure that I got the name right. You're talking about no mounds, really no mounds near you. Have you ever
Yes.
heard of Ohio's Lost Pyramid, the Reservoir Stone Mound?
No, but I would please tell me more.
I had to look. I do remember reading about it, but Mound of Loose Stones, Jacktown Licking Company is showing as a picture. I'd have to send you the information all on it to see if
Please
I can
do.
find some. Yeah, supposedly it was found and then apparently dismantled. I guess, but I didn't know if you'd ever heard about it.
No, and that's very interesting. The only pyramid that I know of that's supposedly hidden is the one in Wisconsin. It's
Yeah,
buried in
in
a
Rock
lake.
Lake.
Yeah,
Rock
and they
Lake,
had
I
a
think they call it. Yeah,
they had a guy dive down. Supposedly, we
yeah.
did this on a show. Dive down and actually touched it. There were some kids that saw the man dive in. They got like a professional diver, went down and like scoped it, touched the top and everything. So, which is fascinating to me. You know,
Well,
it's
wasn't it found by fishermen like during drought,
yeah,
and
because the water had receded. Yeah,
and the
yep.
boat got stuck on the top of it, if I remember right. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. I, because we were talking about pyramids on an episode of This Uncanny Earth, and I was like, because there's pyramids all over the planet.
right.
You know, they're not just in Egypt, as everybody likes to think, but they're all over the planet. Sorry, I didn't mean to divert from the topic, but it made me remember
No,
that Wisconsin had one at the bottom of a lake of
very
all
cool. Yeah,
places.
very cool. Yeah, I think it's called Rock Lake, if I'm not mistaken, and that's
I,
kind
I
of
want I want to say
yeah.
yes on that. I haven't read about it in a while, but I believe you're right. Hey, Dave, how's it going?
Um, okay, let's dive into the Smithsonian again, just a little
Please,
bit. Not
let's
not a,
go.
not a I mean not. You hear about they come in and they took bones, it took skeletons, it took remains. And then you hear about the repatriation. Yeah, I can't even say it. Repatriation Act. Am I saying that right? Where a lot of the remains were even that what the Smithsonian supposedly took was given back to Native American tribes. Do you think that actually happened, or do you feel that they still have some? And do you think that the other conspiracy, which I heard recently, I don't remember when it happened, that a bunch of these skeletons were actually taken on a boat and taken to the ocean and dumped overboard? I mean, how do you feel about any of those?
So first off, I do probably think that they gave some bones back. Some. Just
Yeah.
like when they came into Tesla's apartment and took his works, some of that was sent back because of the museum. They got some stuff that the government gave back. They didn't give everything back. They're not going to get, I mean, we're talking about the government that will tax your wages and keep your money. They're not going to give you back your skeleton bones. If they're going to give me back more money on my taxes, they're not going to give you back your skeleton bones. I know that much. As far as going into the ocean and throwing them overboard, I mean, I don't see that far fetched. I do think that that's something that they would do. I think that that's more. I feel like the government would be more efficient, and I feel like they could just stick them in an incinerator and burn them, or they would get rid of them in a manner that is more efficient.
Yeah.
Because I don't see the necessary reasoning behind throwing them in the ocean. I don't.
Yeah.
I mean, granted, because nobody's going to start swimming in the ocean. But on that same token, nobody's going to try to get into a government establishment or an installation and try to get to whatever basement they have and stop the incinerators from burning up whatever they have. So
Right.
out of that one seems a little far fetched to me. They could do that, like maybe they set it on a marine ship out to the sea, but I don't
Yeah.
get the why
Yeah.
they would do that when there's more efficient ways to get rid of bones than to just. All right, tell Jenkins in the Navy to throw them out, and next time they're out, all right. And that like to think that somebody might not snap a picture of that or be, you know what I mean? People are so I don't necessarily put any weight into that per se, but I do believe they kept some. I don't
Yeah.
think they gave everything back. I just because what are you going to do? What are you going to do if they don't give you something back? You're going to go
Yeah.
take them on? You're going to go get a tribe of Native Americans and go fight the government? Good luck with
Yeah.
that.
And who's to say that these tribes even know how many they have to start with? And my understanding is some of them that were given back didn't even belong to the tribes that they were given to. You know what I mean? They were just like, hey, we got these giant or these they wouldn't even say giant. I guess we got these remains that we believe belong to you. So here, and I don't know it.
That
And
that'd
as
be
far
like
as
that'd be like if you like them giving you your clothes from ancestors you don't even have.
right,
This is Jim's dad's suit. He wore before he passed. Here you go. What do I do with this? Like, what do you want me to do? I do find it interesting that they probably gave them a ritual burial
mm-hmm,
because studying the Great Serpent Mound, at first they thought it was so many years old. Well, they come to find out that it was a lot older than they once had thought
yeah,
because the Native Americans that would come through would clean the area up, make it
right,
look nice again, and then move along as sort of a sign of respect. So I could see that happening because that's just something that I think you would do as a Native American, especially trying to keep your identity and culture intact as a whole. More so now than ever because a lot of that isn't out there as much as it used to be because
right,
people have expanded, cities have grown, new beliefs, new thoughts, new concepts, and a lot of the spiritual aspect of that died once industrialization took its hold. In my personal opinion, once people start getting more industrial, they don't have time for a lot of the spiritual aspects of Native American folklore. And Olivia here talks about Coast to Coast had a guest of the night that was talking about giants found in WV and the Smithsonian covering it up. His name is Stan Gordon. He does
yeah,
cryptids in Pennsylvania.
yeah. Well, Stan Gordon's well known in the Bigfoot aliens. Uh, in Pennsylvania, he's been around a long time. Very,
Yeah, he is.
very well known guy. Um, you're just talking about industrialization. There's a question. I think I'll just use this question to kind of close everything out.
Please.
How come, or why do you think, as much industrialization we have, as much building we have, expanding, and how come there's not the volume of these things being found like they were, 2 or 3 centuries ago? It kind of makes me wonder sometimes. Why do you think it's like kind of, is it being covered up if something's being found? Now I've heard one conspiracy theory I've heard is when something like this is found, like these companies are like, shh, hush hush, because if this is brought to light that these remains are being found, it'll shut everything down. Do you
Yeah.
think that might be a possibility?
What I like to think, unless you are building a Dollar General out in the middle of nowhere, because those seem to just pop up.
There's
I think when
seeds
it
for
comes
those.
right, it just
Just,
it
throw a
just
seed and
grows
they pop up.
over.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
it does. It just grows overnight. I think that anytime you're building in a city, I think a lot of that has already been excavated. A
Mhm.
lot of that has already been dug up, running pipes through, connecting to sewers, this, that, and the third. So I don't think you see that as much, but I do think you probably see it when you're building a home, out in, I wouldn't say the middle of nowhere, when you get a piece of property with acreage on it, I think you might run into that a little bit more. But I think a lot of that has already been found. I
Yeah,
think that there's still some great finds out there, but
yeah,
I think for the most part, your flatland stuff has already been found. I don't
yes,
I don't think a lot of it has been or it's lost to time. There's just
yeah,
some things that are always going to be lost to time. You're not going to be able to find it, especially like you were talking about earlier. You said they find these skeletons buried next to water. Well,
right,
I think after a time, water erosion, and you have water eroding, and then carries whatever it is to wherever that destination is going to be. But I think the reason you don't find it as much is because A, I think we've dug up a good chunk of it, and I think B, because you can pretty much write it off. Unless you are the person finding it or digging for it. Um, I think a lot of time people are just, I want to say, ignorant to it. I believe there is
yeah,
protocol if you find bones on property. I do think you have to call
hmm,
the police in case it's an unsolved murder type thing. But for
yeah,
the most part, I think a lot of that just gets swept under the rug. I mean, people these days, it's a fast paced society. So unless you find something that's utterly going to break archaeology or break history or break our thought process as a whole in terms of where we come from, I think a lot of it gets swept under the rug, to be To be perfectly honest, I don't think that we live in a society that is instant gratification. You know, we can just go watch whatever we want whenever we want. We can do these things whenever we want. So a lot of the wow factor, I think, is gone. Like if somebody said, "Yeah, I dug up a skeleton on my property the other day." Oh man, what happened? Ah, police came, took it. You know, they can't charge me with anything because I
Yeah.
didn't do it. They just dug up the stuff. So I don't think people are as wowed about stuff like this, um, as they were in the 1800s. You figure you don't know about giants. You've been
Yeah.
farming, you've been doing this all your life. You don't know about this, but you dig up something, you're like, whoa, that femur bone is gigantic, or this bone is gigantic. That's something cause for concern. But I don't know. I think that sense of wonderment for a lot of people isn't as prevalent as it used to be. Unless you're in the communities that we're in, your average everyday person that goes to work, comes home, does his thing. I just don't think they're excited about this kind of stuff, to be honest with you. I could be wrong,
Yeah.
but I just don't think when this stuff is found these days, like you said, it's either swept under the rug or it's so old that it deteriorates because we do have records of them digging up bones in these mounds and it basically just crumbles.
Right.
It's solid when they dig it up, but then as soon as the air hits it and everything else hits it, it just crumbles. So that's another possibility. Maybe we're at that point where if they are dug up, it just crumbles.
Yeah, and I agree. I agree also that I believe that a lot of the land that is being developed or has already been developed in a way, some way or another, and basic, for lack of better words, there's just not it's just not virgin land anymore. It's been torn up, it's been
Yeah.
redone. It's
Yeah.
been whether it was through
And and
agriculture, or
and
things
and,
like
and
that.
and think about it like this too, not to interrupt you, but if it's a place that's near water and it's near resources that are easily accessible, then yeah, it's probably been built on a few times. It's probably seen
Mhm.
a few families go through it. Um, I think though, when you have people that come in to clear whole acreage of forests, that's when you might want to start asking some questions. But other than that, I think your flatlands have been pretty much excavated. You
Yeah.
might get a diamond in the rough here and there, but I think for the most part, um, yeah. And like Marilyn said, there's a hesitancy to report cryptid findings. I don't
Right.
think it's as I don't think it is as frowned upon now because you have shows like Ghost Adventures, you have shows like the Mountain Men,
Yeah.
and all of those shows about Bigfoot, ghosts, UFOs. I don't think it's as hush hush now, where growing up, and I know Les is probably like this too. When you heard stuff in your family about seeing things, it pretty much
Mm.
stayed in the family. You
Mm.
didn't go off and tell random strangers, "Hey, I saw a ghost the other day," or "I saw a UFO." You kind of kept it to yourself because people looked at you sideways. And so I think I think in this day and age you can report it. That doesn't necessarily mean people are going to take it serious. Because once again,
Right.
oversaturation. People are like,
Absolutely.
oh, okay, maybe you saw a weather balloon. I didn't see a weather balloon, but all right.
Yeah.
But I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Yep.
I wanted to point
That's
out
right.
that, like you said, flatland has already been excavated. They've already built houses. These houses, they collapse or something happens to them and they got to clean them out. And then they
Mm.
just build on top of it. And if you already have the existing plumbing there, how would you won't need to dig any deeper. Or if you can already dig, the former shell of the old house is there, you don't need to really do much. So I agree with you. I think a lot of things have just it's already been dug up.
Yep. And I think here in West Virginia, as well as other areas around the United States, as far as their waterways, you know, look how many dams have been built. Look how many
Yeah.
reservoirs of that were not reservoirs at the time. That now exist here in
Yeah.
the state of West Virginia. Just here in what there is multiple river. Like I said, I think there's 126 named rivers and creeks, and then multiple streams and tributaries in the state. But there's only one natural lake in West Virginia, and that's what they call the trout pond in Hardy County. Everything else is man-made. Every lake here is man-made. The dams have been put in for coal production and barges, and water levels have raised significantly. The road I talked about earlier, the Macadam Road, if you look into it, it's most likely underwater now, because of the dams like Morgantown and then further on down the Okapiski Dam. Those have all raised the water significantly. So a lot of that's lost because of industrialization, because of that stuff. I agree with you.
Yeah, 100%. I think anything you're going to find especially in West Virginia, because it's very mountainous, it's very hilly. I think anything you're going to find is going to be diamond in the rough stuff. It's going to be something that was put away and hid for a reason. It's not just something that's easily accessible. I think there's still great things to find in I think West Virginia is one of the few states, in my personal opinion, outside of some of the stuff in the West Coast with the cave systems and stuff, that you're going to find some very, very wonderful things, but you're going to have to hunt for them, because it's not like it used to be. It's not like you can just walk a couple feet and just dig up a giant skeleton. I don't think you can do that much anymore. So,
no.
But I do agree.
Maybe,
and I'm sorry, go ahead.
Maybe one day, because there's still these caves being found that are just a small opening that people go back into and realize that there's caverns in there.
Yes.
Maybe one day that'll happen. Not necessarily here in West Virginia, but in other parts, Kentucky, there's caves like that.
Mammoth Cave System,
yeah. Maybe it'll happen one day.
And that's all it takes, is finding off a closed off and being able to access it with technology that we have today. And now you've opened up a whole new thing. And now it changes the course of human events. But maybe that's already happened and the government just doesn't tell us.
Right. Yeah, it's a good possibility. West 100%. Virginia is truly wild and wonderful. Yes, it is, Maryland.
Agreed. I love it.
A lot of people don't realize it is. Yeah, all the people. Here's another fact. This is off the subject fact. I'll just close out with it. A lot of people do not realize that West Virginia is number 3 most forested state in the United States.
Yes.
Number 3. 78% forested. Some people would think, oh, maybe it's Oregon, maybe it's Washington, nope, it's Maine, New Hampshire, and West Virginia, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
Yep. All right, Robert, I want to thank you a bunch. I really enjoyed it. Had a great time. I'll see you Saturday.
I will be there.
I won't be there long. I'm going to stop by. We're going to hang out for about an hour or so before we head on up to family. And I enjoyed it. We need to talk some more about it. And if I can find, we're talking about the Nephilim. I think he mentioned it. There's 2 episodes on Sasquatch Chronicles where this fella comes in talking about how the Nephilim either was or couldn't be related to the Bigfoot subject. I can't remember which one it is. I think it might be not. And he mentions, he talks about all that you were talking about, but he talks about the Nephilim being giants of shore for sure. But I'm pretty sure he said they had like serpent heads and scaly skin, but had hair. So yeah, if I can find those episodes, I'll send them to you. Thank you, Tony.
Interesting. It's interesting you bring this up, and I won't go in on it, but the Naga of East Asia were serpent-headed beings. So that's I wonder if there's a link there and all that jazz. Thank you, Tony. I appreciate it. And James also, thank you very much. I appreciate all the comments. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, James. Well, if I'll find them, I'll send them to you. I'm telling you, man, he's 2 episodes. There's I forget how long apart. They're not like back to back, but he's on one time, then he invites him back. I know it's a Bigfoot related podcast, but man, when I loved it. He had that guy on for 2 times.
I'm gonna have to find that guy and have him on the show.
Yeah, it was great. He actually has a couple books written. But yeah, I'll find them episodes and send them to you. And with that, I want to say again, thank you. See you tomorrow or see you Saturday.
I'll be there.
Thanks everybody for coming. We had a great time, and we'll get ready to close out here. And I'll see you in a little bit, Robert.
See you.
All right. Thank you, guys. Thank you, gals, for everybody coming. You can watch it and listen to us chat. Sometimes we got off topic a couple times, but that's the fun part about it. Again, we want to send our heartfelt prayers out to Fred Saluga. He's a good friend of both of ours. He's a good friend of the show here. And we definitely feel for him. And if you always, as always, if you got something you want to share, you want to be a guest on the podcast, if you have Bigfoot, ghosts, aliens, anything, anything you want to discuss, and we'll discuss it. Come on, give me a shout. Just come go over to West Virginia Case 304 at yahoo.com, leave me a message, and we'll get something scheduled. And we will see you all next time. See ya.